Thank you. So, Health Now for today. We're going to talk about antibiotic resistance. How does it affect you? Can you avoid potential problems with antibiotics? So, what is antibiotic resistance? It's abbreviated ABR or AR in some cases in the literature. So it's the natural tendency for bacteria to evolve in such a way as to become capable of surviving in spite of antibiotic drugs. So what's the result? The result is when you need a drug to kill a harmful bacteria, it is difficult and or very expensive to find one that works. So a little history, antibiotic resistance history. Penicillin was discovered in 1928, less than 100 years ago. It was widely used during the World War II period to fight bacterial infection. And the first cases of antibiotic resistance were noted in the 1940s, right after World War II. By the late 1950s, antibiotic resistance to multiple drugs was noted for some very common bacterial infections. You're probably familiar with Salmonella, Shigella, and E. coli. So, antibiotic resistance was not much of an issue through the 1960s as development of antibiotics, new antibiotics, outpaced the rate of resistant bacteria. The golden era of antibiotics, however, ended in the early 1970s because few new antibiotics have been discovered since that time, relatively few. The pace of resistant bacteria has accelerated as more antibiotics were used. So those two things go hand in hand. The more you use antibiotics, the more resistant pathogens emerge. An example is multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis. This has emerged in countries where healthcare is either poor or minimal because they're trying to use inexpensive, readily available antibiotics to fight tuberculosis, and the tuberculosis becomes resistant to that. So it's also resistant to a number of these inexpensive, readily available antibiotics. So, what is the cause? It's multifaceted. Excessive use of antibiotics, animals, used in animals, especially animals for food, also in pets and even in fish, believe it or not. Because remember, a lot of the fish we get is from fish farms, so they can control the food inputs to those fish. It's also due to misuse in humans. My wife said this morning when I was telling her about my presentation, she said, yeah, I remember when you sneezed and you went to the doctor and they gave you an antibiotic for it. Makes no sense, but they used to do that for all kinds of stuff, even though it wasn't related to a bacterial infection. Unregulated over-the-counter availability. So a lot of countries, even today, you can go into a store, not even a drugstore necessarily, but any store and buy antibiotics. Don't have to have a prescription. Not the case in the U.S. and a lot of other countries, but in some countries that is the case. So there's also been a greater amount of international travel, so these bugs get spread around more, and the resistant bugs also get spread around more. There's poor sanitation and hygiene. So that causes the spread of these pathogens, resistant pathogens, and also the release of non-metabolized antibiotics and residues into our environment via animal manure used in agriculture and inadequate waste treatment plant. Okay? So they got to get rid of that stuff in waste treatment, and some of these countries don't have that ability to do that. So the WHO, World Health Organization, has said that antimicrobial resistance is a top 10 global public health threat for humanity. Now, AMR includes all the microbes, so antimicrobial includes all of the microbes like virus, fungus, parasites, etc. CDC, Center for Disease Control in the USA, says AMR accounts for over 3 million infections per year and about 40,000 deaths. And that's annually in the U.S. And I've seen other estimates that are even higher. So antibiotic resistance is a large percentage of this thing called AMR, antimicrobial resistance. So in animals, antibiotics have been used for feed to promote growth. So they found that by giving them antibiotics, they grow bigger and faster. And that's what these ranchers and chicken farmers and so forth want. They want big animals, they get more money for them. This practice has been banned in the European Union since 2006. Hopefully it ends everywhere soon. I'm not a animal producer in the U.S., so I don't know the current state of that practice in the U.S. It was used here at one time, at least. So in other countries, the most populous countries of the world, they estimate that by 2030, the use of antibiotics in animals will increase by 67%. That is not a good trend. Consequences are after about 70 years of antibiotics, so starting in about 2015, bacterial infection is once again a serious threat to human life. So are there solutions? Well, the research community is looking for new alternatives to antibiotics. One possibility that's mentioned, among others, is something called AMPs, or antimicrobial peptides. Now, peptide is simply one of the building blocks of proteins. So apparently these peptides are capable of getting rid of or suppressing bacterial infection. So the problem, they believe, as soon as they become widely used in clinical practice, that bacteria will also develop a resistance to these antimicrobial peptides. So that's not good either. Other alternatives, let's see, I might have missed one. Let's go back. Let's try that. Yeah, so herbal medicines. Yes, the scientific medical community, which really tends to distrust or dislike natural remedies of any kind, are actually so desperate. There are serious opinions out there that are being voiced that herbal remedies are actually a practical alternative option to drugs. So what can I do? What can you do to keep yourself safe from this issue? And this is not just a kidding around issue. This is a very serious problem. You can save antibiotic use only for the most critical or dire needs that you might have. Do not go to your doctor or healthcare provider and ask them or expect an antibiotic prescription for minor issues. Use less or no animal products from animals suspected to be on antibiotics. Now, if you don't know for sure that they're not on antibiotics, I would assume they are. So that's the only safe way to approach that issue. What else can you do? Well, stay healthy, obviously. Optimize your immune system. Thus, your body is better able to fight off bacterial infections through natural means. Utilize the 8 natural remedies, especially exercise, sunlight, and fresh air. These all help optimize your own immune system. So conclusions for today: the more antibiotics are used, the more resistant pathogens appear. Discovery of new antibiotics have long ceased to stay ahead of the rate of new resistant pathogens. There are no good or immediate solutions to antibiotic resistance. Sounds kind of problematic for the future, and it is. That is the honest truth. So, no good solutions coming up on the horizon at this point. References, there are several. Looking ahead. So, July 23rd, I'm going to talk about how adaptive is human physiology to high ambient temperatures, fairly appropriate for